Welcome to the second season of the Ecologies of Danger podcast. Ecologies of Danger is a project produced by the students of a course on environmental security at Colgate University. In this season, we look at the different ways in which the environment has become a security issue. In this episode, Mary Clubb highlights the racism at the heart of Louisiana's Cancer Alley.
The air is so foul, the water is so messed up, and so many people are ill and dying of cancer.
These are the words of Geraldine Watkins. She has lived with her family in St. John the Baptist Parish in Louisiana for almost 40 years. She's one of many people living along the Mississippi River between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. Geraldine and her community are at the highest risk in the country of developing cancer from air toxins. They live in what has come to be known as Cancer Alley. Cancer Alley is an 85-mile stretch of land that houses more than 150 chemical plants and refineries. Most of the towns along this stretch are made up of lower-income communities of color, making Cancer Alley a perfect example of environmental racism. So what is environmental racism? Al Jazeera reporter Femi Oki takes a look.
Right now in the United States, if you're black or Asian or Latino, the air that you breathe is more polluted or could be more polluted than if you happen to be white. Now, what about if you're white and from a poor community? Well, the likelihood of being exposed to industrial pollution is higher as well. And that's because it's generally cheaper and easier to build coal and petroleum facilities, sewage fields, even industrial pig farms in low-income communities. Property prices are lower and people have fewer resources to fight back. Activists call it environmental racism.
This isn't a new concept, though. What today we call the environmental justice movement emerged a couple of decades ago. In 1987, the United Church of Christ Commission on Racial Justice released a report explaining that in the U.S., 15 million of the nation's 26 million African Americans lived in communities with one or more toxic waste sites. That's over half of the African American population. The same report showed that communities with the highest minority populations had the greatest amount of hazardous waste facilities. Environmental racism has clearly been an issue for years. More plants are built in these areas because of promises of an economic boom and strong lobbying. It's the poverty in these regions that the petrochemical industry can take advantage of. So ask yourself where the closest hazardous waste facility is to your home. Where's the closest waste incinerator, the closest refinery? If you can't answer these questions, consider why. Let's start to think about these injustices, how they happen, why they keep happening. Princeton professor Robert Nixon can help give us some framework to better understand how this racism happens. He speaks to a variety of environmental concerns, saying that
all of these pose, I think, formidable representational challenges that can hinder our effort to create the stories and images that are so necessary imaginatively for us to mobilize around.
We'll hear again from Nixon later, but now let's go back to Cancer Alley and see how that region plays into all this. First of all, let's recap. What is Cancer Alley? Cancer Alley follows the Mississippi River for 85 miles. Large petrochemical institutions like Shell and Exxon populate this strip of land, and they rake in billions of dollars each year. Why is it called Cancer Alley? Because the people living in this region have the highest risk in the country of developing cancer from air toxins. The risk for people like Geraldine Watkins, who live in or close to St. John the Baptist Parish, ranges from 5 times to 20 times the national average. The pollutants are heavily concentrated in this region. Near St. John the Baptist Parish, the Denka plant emits 99% of the chloroprene emitted by plants across the entire country. And chloroprene is a chemical the EPA has linked to cancer among many other health problems. In an internal memo, the EPA set the recommended chloroprene emissions to be 0.2%, while this plant emits up to 34 times that number. Chuck Carr-Brown, Secretary for the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality, recently spoke with CNN about this issue.
Best available control technology is an acceptable protocol. We've got a protocol in place that our data shows us there's no imminent threat.
On the other end of the debate, we return to Geraldine.
You gotta live here to try and breathe the air, drink the water, see the children so sick, watch your people die. If you don't live in the area, you can say anything, and everybody's supposed to believe that.
This is not just a St. John the Baptist Parish concern. Cancer Alley houses 25% of the petrochemical production in the United States. It has done so since the 1980s. People all along this land between Baton Rouge and New Orleans have faced similar issues for years. So clearly this is a health concern, but why isn't it being addressed, and why hasn't it changed for nearly 4 decades? Now This interviewed 2 other Cancer Alley residents who shared their thoughts.
It's not just not fair, it's crooked and it's corrupt because Big Oil has hijacked our democracy in Louisiana.
Our government stands more with these companies that put money into their pockets. So because these companies back up the government, our government don't back up us.
Well, we got all the energy in the world, and this is what it looked like. We're the second poorest state. Because they've hijacked the democracy because they keep getting exceptions and exemptions to the Clean Air and the Clean Water Act.
Regardless of your faith in the government to enforce equal and environmental protections, there's clearly something happening in Louisiana: environmental racism. In the St. James Parish, which is another town along this stretch, polluting industries are located in regions with the highest percentages of African American residents. These same regions also have the lowest average incomes and the lowest education levels. In contrast, the whitest areas of the town have the highest employment in these same industries. These areas of high employment are also the wealthiest and have the highest education levels. St. James Parish and St. John the Baptist Parish reflect the demographics of all of Cancer Alley. Cancer Alley is 40% black and 55% white. So even though the black population makes up only 12% of the United States, black people make up almost half the population of Cancer Alley. Federal investment, tax exemptions, and water discharge permits have let petrochemical facilities off the hook. Since 1997, these companies have legally let over 140 million pounds of chemicals into the environment. This all means that lower-income people of color in this region have been disproportionately exposed to chemical toxins. So let's return to Robert Nixon. As I mentioned earlier, he's a professor at Princeton in Humanities and the Environment. Nixon's main studies can help to explain how this happens using a concept he calls slow violence.
In other words, a violence that is neither instantaneous nor spectacular, but instead is incremental. It builds attritionally. And its calamitous repercussions are postponed over time, over a variety of time frames. So this question of postponement is very critical here.
In his book, he explains that the casualties of this slow violence are out of sync with the quick-moving political system. Candidates move in and out of office while this violence exists over longer, drawn-out periods of time that make our electoral process look like a revolving door. This slow violence happens more to marginalized communities because of the nature of exclusion from our political system. This slow violence is happening in Louisiana. So as the petrochemical industries flourish, a strip of Louisiana is left to die over a long period of time. The most marginalized people in the third poorest state in the country have been fighting back for decades. Something clearly needs to change in the way we talk about violence and talk about environmental justice.